Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 106. I am your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the acclaimed author, artist, and game designer, Dirk Stanley. Dirk.
Hey Barney, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. And we're talking. I was showing you earlier. I'm an avid fan of the Faraway Land role playing game. I think this is all of them so far, right? I think I got on your last Kickstarter, right? Do I have them all? It's 5, or is there? I'm missing. I think I'm missing Creature.
Yeah, you're missing one. You're missing. I have it right here in front of me. Yeah, News Oz.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So okay. I'll send you a copy of that. Just let me know. News Oz was like heavily inspired. I co-wrote it and illustrated it with Colin Chapman, who was a big influence on that. And he was also somebody that like helped out a lot with Adventures in the Materiosphere on multiple levels. But right. News Oz was like heavily inspired by New Zealand, so it has all these like creatures and characters sort of inspired by elements of New Zealand.
Okay, and so do you? As I say, I think it'll be interesting. We dive in and we want to talk a bit about your your Kickstarter that just came out, and you had a $500 goal, and you're at 26, and you've only been doing this for what, 2 days now already?
Yeah, 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah, it's got 27 days left to go.
And you have a great fan base of people who love your Faraway Land RPG games. You constantly, and I want to talk to you about this. You write it all, you illustrate it all. These are all, and you had all full color pictures in here that you illustrate in all your books. Yeah. Your main book, this is the main book, correct?
Right. Yes.
And it is. It's about 300 pages. It's
right.
It's thick. I mean, I have so many questions. One was like, where do you find the time to make 200, 100 page books all the time? You know, with all this stuff. But first, I want to kind of get people to jump into it and just kind of give people a bit of a background of what the game universe is.
Sure.
You set up.
Yeah. So it's really largely inspired by. Like a lot of it's abstractly inspired by like just stuff from the 80s, pop culture from the 80s, cartoons from the 80s, commercials from the 80s, music from the 80s, videos from the 80s. There aren't direct references to this, but like the 80s to me, in my mind, the 80s in my mind was 10 years ago, which I know it wasn't, but it was also this huge influence on me. All of the pop culture and all of those elements were things that I just really loved. And I also love like cartoons and animation, and I love quirky stuff. I love sort of dark humor. And I also like stuff that's just sort of like fun and not really super serious. And so all of that stuff, and I love role playing too, and tabletop games and all of that. So all of that sort of just coalesced and into this world, which was Faraway Land, with this quirky planet that went through this major catastrophe where these invaders came from another world, and they were trying to get to this planet. And as they did this, they opened up these fissures that basically wrecked the universe and allowed all this stuff in. And so the Tome of Awesome, the book that you were holding up, sort of goes into some detail on that. And then Adventures in the Materiosphere really sort of takes that and expands it out and goes much deeper into that dive of how does everything get to the place that it is. And so really what that was just sort of this, I guess, narrative device to explain, here's why there's a bunch of weird stuff going on this planet. There's all these creatures and stuff, and it's because they came from different planets, different points in the universe, different times, different dimensions, and that sort of thing. And like I said, it's just that narrative sort of device that allowed me to say, you know what, I can do anything I want with this world now. And I can expand it however I want. So if I want, I can have a fantasy planet, or I can have a primitive planet where people are just like, banging on each other with bones, or I can have a technologically advanced planet. It just allows me to like sort of throw whatever I want into the faraway land mix.
And so I got to ask you too, when it comes to this from the world building perspective on here, what are, we think about the whole point of creating the physics of your world in the sense of, like George Lucas says, all right, in my world, there is sound in space. What are some of those? Do you have any things where there's like a very specific, far away universe, far away land thing that is like from a physics perspective that just always exists, that can't be swayed in any specific way in that world building perspective?
Yeah, so that's actually like a really cool question. I love that like George Lucas is totally cool with sound in space, because I'm totally cool with sound in space too. It's like whatever you've got to do to like get the person immersed in there. I know that breaks immersion for some people. I think the big thing, I think the big thing with any universe that you're creating is sort of to stick to the system of physics that you've created. And if you break that, then you break immersion for the person. And like I said, I think with Faraway Land, like I made that so broad that like it gives me a lot of like leeway in like if I break, are there rules that I break, or can I just do sort of whatever I want? But one of those pieces that you were talking about, like a specific piece of world building, I think would be in Adventures in the in Materiosphere. The way that space travel works is I spent a lot of time, and I think I talk about this on the Kickstarter. I spent a lot of time trying to come up with something sort of that felt unique as far as like science fiction. And so one of the underlying things in Adventures in the Materiosphere, or in how the Faraway Land universe works, is that the universe itself is sort of made up of this resonant music that was left over after the creation. And when I came up with this, I was really heavily reading Tolkien's The Silmarillion. And I love this idea of like this creation. I love the idea of creation mythos. And I also loved Tolkien's idea of this like sort of music that was used to create the universe. And so I was like, well, you know what? If I'm going to steal something, I might as well steal from like, J.R.R. Tolkien. So I had this idea of what if this resonant music sort of continued to exist in the universe? And then what if there were some people that were able to hear it? And then what if there were these people that were able to harness that thing? And so that's really where the idea for space travel and Faraway Land came from, was this idea of you can capture this sort of music in the universe. And there's these people called virtuosos who operate these giant cosmic organs that are on these spaceships. And this music is caught in what's called a harmony drive. And it looks like a giant sort of this pipe organ with all these bends and folds of these pipes and chambers in it. And that music gets caught in this harmony drive, and then the virtuoso wearing big headphones can hear this, and they operate this giant cosmic organ that allows them to basically rip Materiospace and enter into this realm of second space and sort of move through there much faster than they could in Materiospace. So it was a way, again, it was a narrative device to get around faster than light travel, so that you could cross, like, even if you're traveling at the speed of light, it still takes you, 100,000 years to go from one side of the galaxy to the other. How do you get around that for the sake of narrative and plot? And that was really sort of, I didn't want people to have like, you can be anywhere you want at any time. It's not a TARDIS. But at the same time, I wanted to have some sort of unique mechanic and unique physics that allowed them to sort of traverse vast distances, or at least to give the feel that that's what they were doing. So that's one of those, I guess, if that answers that question.
Yeah. So with this here, this seems to be, and because you're you create a lot of things. You as we were talking before in the air, you did some comic strips. You write. What made you decide to make this a role-playing game instead of a webcomic or a comic book, or just like a series of writings?
Yeah, so I think that, like, for me, I think I've done like illustration and writing for such a long period of time now that I don't really have a distinguishing thing between those two. I don't feel like they're really that different for me anymore. And Faraway Land is essentially just like a big world building exercise. And I was like, you know what? I want to build this really big world, and I need to understand it. And in order to write stories in this world, I wanted to first build the world. So I guess that's what I did for the last 5 years. And I was like, I'll make a role playing game out of it too, and that way I can like let other people play in it. But I think the thing that I love about like doing something like this is that with like a role-playing game, if you're the sole creator of that, I get to do like all of the illustration, I get to do all the writing, I get to do the editing, I get to do the layout, I get to do the play testing, I get to mess with the mechanics, I get to build the world, I get to do all of those things. And they're all sorts of things that I really love. And then the other part is that I love playing games so that I can like participate in that world with other people. And I don't know of any other sort of art form that really allows for that, allows me to like put all of those different things together and allows other people to come in and experience those things and us to do that together. And that's really one of the things that I love about like role-playing games ever since I was a kid, that it just incorporates all these beautiful art forms, and you can make these really amazing emergent worlds that you get to play with with your friends. I think it's just a really neat art form.
Right. And so talk to us a bit about here the if somebody asked you, if they they can download the quick start rules for playing Faraway Land on drivethrurpg.com, or they can also just see that link through going to faruniverse.com, which seems to be the hub of your Faraway Land books. What basically is for our audio listeners? What basically is the mechanics of Faraway Land that is unique for this?
Yeah, so it's a dice pool, sort of a simple dice pool where you roll. You basically have 3 stats in Faraway Land, and each of those stats has a number associated with it. They're all single digits. And then you may also have like a boon, which is like a skill, or you may have a flaw, and that modifies that stat, or it's connected to that stat. And so what you would do is you would take whatever that number is for the stat and whatever the number is for that boon, and you would roll that many dice. And then from that D6 pool, what you would do is you would keep the high die that you rolled. And there's special rules for some stuff, like if you roll 2 6s, then that second 6 would add a +1, so you would have a 7. So that's really the whole base mechanic. And then you take whatever that roll was, and you compare that to a set target number, a target number of depending on the difficulty of the whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, or you compare it with an opposed roll. And then whatever's the highest, equal to or higher, wins. That's really the entire mechanic for the game.
So for folks that are thinking about, hey, I want to design my own role-playing game, how did you design? So you kind of created the world first, and then kind of created a system to put into it. How difficult or easy was that to create a game system inside of it?
I think, I listened to somebody talk, and I won't call them out here because I actually agree with what they said. I think it's smart to use an existing system. And I wonder if I went back and redid it, and started over with it, if I would use an existing system. I do like the Faraway Land system. I think it's really easy. You can pick it up really quick. You can play you can use it with people who've never played before. Kids can pick it up and play it pretty easily. But at the same time, there's a lot of games out there, and when people have to learn a new system, even if it's something that's simple, it still there's a learning curve to that. And a lot of times, people are working and doing all these other things in life, and they don't necessarily want to pick up a new system. So I don't even know if I answered that question. I don't even remember what the question was.
So the question: How did you design it, and did you have to play test it at all, or how did?
Yeah, so that was really the main thing, is figuring out what's the core mechanic. And the way that I always thought of it was sort of a hub, and then attached to that hub you have sort of modular systems, so that if you figure out what that core mechanic is, and that core mechanic has some balance to it, and that balance can be that's sort of a vague sort of a vague term, but I think that it was balanced the way I wanted it to be balanced. I didn't want combat to be too swingy. I didn't want combat to go on too long. I wanted it to have like an old school feel. I didn't want characters to feel like they were invincible. I want you to feel very vulnerable. When you make a character in Faraway Land, I want you to feel finite. So I think the idea was, get a core design and then add modules to it, and it's really that idea of where you know a system works and then you add another system onto that, and then once that system works, so you're not designing everything all at once. You know if something's broken, then all these pieces that already work, and then whatever's broken, it's probably the most recent thing that you've added onto that, and that's really how I went about doing that.
So let's have you put on your artist hat for a second here and talk about your artwork. I love it. I've never seen something that has so much gritty, high fantasy, sci-fi, but so accessible where it's engaging to all ages, and it's the color, it's the way your artwork is. It's accessible and beautiful at the same time. And so I guess my question for you, Dirk, is, first of all, what do you use? Is it do you draw everything out in pencil, or is it all on like a tablet or Photoshop? How do you work on that?
Yeah, so in the Tome of Awesome, everything was Tome of Awesome is the original core book. Everything was done. I drew everything by hand, and then I scanned it all in, and then I went over it in vector, and then I dropped that vector into Photoshop, and then I colored the whole thing in Photoshop. And so doing a drawing for the Tome of Awesome, one drawing took forever. It would take days to do it, because I couldn't just go through and like figure out the composition and just sketch the whole thing out. I mean, I didn't really work like that at that time, so it just took forever to do the art for that. After that first Kickstarter, the first thing that I bought was with whatever money was left over, I bought a tablet, a Samsung tablet, and that's what I draw. I draw everything in Sketchbook Pro now, and I color everything in Sketchbook Pro.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
And so just any tips and advice for folks looking at that? What was a mistake that you made that you're glad you learned from early on?
So I'm a big proponent of this idea of fail fast, of like make mistakes and quickly learn from them, because that's basically like, when I look back, like that's what life is. It's a bunch of failures that like you really learn, like you're troubleshooting life as you go along. So
right.
I'm troubleshooting my life. It seems like such a crazy concept. But I think like the idea, like the big thing that I learned was workflow. How do I get into a workflow? And bouncing back between writing and drawing really allowed me to do that, because if I was like, I'm not sure where to go with this writing piece, I need to do some artwork, and then I would go through and do the art, and then I come back and I've had time to let that writing breathe, and I can sort of think about it and then return to it, and it's fresh again. Same thing with the art. But I think the really like figuring out what my workflow was, what felt good to me. When you enter into something new, you're sort of discovering that thing. So if you've never drawn a picture before, the first thing that you're sort of figuring out is, how do I hold the pencil? And it makes everything more awkward. It's like walking up or down stairs. We just sort of do it. But if you're thinking about how your knee moves and your ankle and how your foot lands on each step, everything becomes incredibly complicated. And if you're doing it for the first time, it is like that. But after you do it for a bunch, then you sort of get into it. And so I think one of the big learning things for me, one of the big learning curves, was learning what my own process was when I put together a 300 or 400 page book.
And I gotta add, so looking through all this stuff, and the characters, the NPCs, the races that you've created, what's your process like when you sit down? Do you draw first, and do you draw out races? It's like, all right, I'm going to make this up now, or do you make it up as you write it out and then say, all right, now I'm just going to see what this looks like? How does that work for you?
I think lots of stealing. I'm just joking. I think like the picture that you've got up on the screen there, I believe that's the image that was in the original, like the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. And I sort of use that as like the premise for that. For one thing, it's like when people see things that are familiar to them, they form this tether to it. They have this sort of emotional or maybe even nostalgic connection. Some of the characters come from just like things that I like. For example, there's this race of these giant robots called 10 times 10 men. And there was this Wu-Tang song where they have this line, 10 times 10 men. And I was like, yeah, what if you had this giant robot that was like the strength of 10 men times 10 men? And another example is like Adventures in the Materiosphere. There's a race of people called edgelords. And I wasn't like super familiar with what edgelords was until I was like in a class and like students were like, yeah, it's so edgy, he's an edgelord or whatever. And I went and looked it up and I was like, this needs to be like an entire race of people like, or an entire species of these edgy people. So it's really just like a mix of stuff. And then some of it comes from pop culture. Like there's these people called the Zurdrus. And they're based on this Sean Connery movie from the 70s called Zardoz, where he wears these like red Pretty Woman hooker boots and these like bandoleros.
I remember that. Yeah.
And that's what they're from. And they've got like ponytails and these like, porn star mustaches and stuff. And that's really what the influence was.
And so do you come up with the idea, then draw it out, or basically?
Yeah, I think it's about 50-50 for me.
It?
I think that like sometimes I'm just drawing, or I'm like, I'm watching like Zardoz and I'm like, that needs to be, I want something like this in here, and then I'll do it, and then I'll be like, let's stat this out and figure out how I can like shoehorn this into this already like completely messed up universe.
Because you have all these like is it the nine different spheres? Is that what it is? I think I remember seeing that map you have on here in your first book. Hey folks, I just wanted to take a quick break and say thank you so much for listening and watching Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. If you can, please subscribe. If you can, hit the like button. Go ahead and leave a review on your favorite podcast app that you might be listening to this on. And remember, always support local artists, support local writers, support independent creators. It sure does mean a lot to them. And we will be here at Storycomic to make sure that their voices are being heard. Thank you. What would you say is like the default race that you have on here? Because you don't have, it's not really humans.
Yeah, I don't think there's a default race. I didn't want humans to be like, humans aren't like a dominant species in faraway land. I think that humans are necessary for the connection for a lot of people, because it's difficult for us as humans to connect to things that we're unfamiliar with.
Right.
And it has elves and dwarves and that sort of stuff, but there's not a lot of sort of, I guess, like fantasy trope races in faraway land. Most of it's really sort of proprietary to faraway land. I would say that like my favorite species in faraway land, and what I see as the dominant species, at least on the world of faraway land, are the orca. The
pointy-headed.
Yeah, folks. Cyclops.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really my favorite, and one of the first things that I came up with.
And I tell you, when I first got that, your Tome of Awesome, I went straight to the back and read the cosmology and the history and the timeline, because that sets it up for me to really and I gotta add, so my next question is like, when you get into a zone and you just start like typing away or writing away, do you go back and because the creativity starts spinning and going, do you ever go back and reread your stuff like 3 months later? I'm like, wow, that was really good. I like, do you impress yourself on some of the things that you come up with? Not to humble brag, but do you read something like that's pretty cool? Like,
I think so. I think sometimes I think that I think a lot of times I spend so much time with it before it ever lands on the page, where I'm
Right.
just sort of, it's sort of so familiar to me at that point that it's familiar. Like part of my process is I've really just got like this compost pile that's constantly like going, and by the time it comes out on the page, I'm so used to it. I do know, like you had that picture of that giant space tortoise, and that's something that I actually really love, are those giant space tortoises and how they sort of, how they're born and how they merge with the star when they die and form a sapient star. It's like a story that I was really like sort of proud of myself for like writing that story. That doesn't happen a lot, but like there are times where I felt like, man, that's sort of a unique idea. I really kind of love that thing. Even if it is a giant space tortoise that like dies by merging with a star.
And so what made you decide as well? It's like, so just from putting on your hat from a Kickstarter and just like a world building as a, you know, the caretaker of the faraway land universe. How do you set yourself up to make your expansion books? Because you mentioned the one book that I don't have is from your ideas from New Zealand. Do you kind of follow a pattern, or do you see do you have like a list of ideas? You're like, well, I got to put these someplace, so let me just make something later. Do you have a list in your head of like upcoming books as well?
Yeah, I think that Adventures in the Materiosphere, it's almost 400 pages. It's over 300. It's over 360 illustrations, and it got to the point where it was just because my wife told me, she was like, you're going to have to like come to a point where you stop adding to this, because I was less like, I need to put this in here too. I do have a list. Like after I don't know if you saw it, Barney, the most recent Mad Max movie. What is it? Fury Road. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
So after I watched that movie, I was like, you know what? I want a Mad Max world for Faraway Land. And so I was in like the very beginning stages of Adventures in Materiosphere. And I was like, nope, you know what? I'm going to set it to the side and I'm making Mad Max world for Faraway Land. And I did. And I wrote out like, I've got a ton of stuff and I've got a ton of artwork for it. And then I was like, no, you know what? I actually need to focus on Adventures in the Materiosphere. And then that project sort of got set aside after my fascination with Fury Road, like sort of like, you know, went away for a little while.
Right.
So I don't really have like a plan as like, this is what's coming next. I've got a bunch of stuff that's like sort of in different phases. You know, a savage world where that's very sort of similar to a setting that I love from D&D, Dark Sun. And then, you know, the Mad Max world. And then I've got a couple ideas and a bunch of stuff written on these things, but right. I don't have any plans. There's nobody at this wheel. It's just rudderless.
So how territorial are you of this? Have you had any readers or people like, hey, Dirk, I got some good ideas. Can I write a supplement? Have you said, let me hear about it? Like, nope, don't touch it. Thank you, though. Yeah,
I fall like, I don't know where I fall on this. I feel like I've spent so much time with it that it's mine. Right. But at the same time, like I've enjoyed working with Colin on stuff too. It's really nice to work with somebody else to get, because Colin knows a great deal about New Zealand and was able to like bring a lot of new stuff to the table. And I don't think if it would have been me doing it, that the book would have been done, or that I would have been able to bring those things to the table, because I'm just sort of limited in what I'm able to consume and then what I'm able to synthesize and sort of compost. So, yeah.
And so I guess my next question is related to that is, what do you have as, all right, let me, I'm going to timestamp this because I was thinking about asking two questions at once and then I got my head stuck on here. So I'm going to edit this part out later, Dirk. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if we were live or not. If this was in live, like where there's people watching, or is this live being recorded live? I wasn't really sure.
Oh yeah, we got a few people watching.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. So what I do is it's live, and then I do is I clean it up, and then when I post on like an edited version of YouTube. on there later. So
cool.
So then let's so Dirk, let's talk about the Kickstarter. Let's dive in and chat about this and your pledge levels and all this kind of fun stuff. What I like about what you do, this is your 7th or 8th Kickstarter that you've done?
I think so, yeah.
And what do you want to kind of talk to people a little bit about what they can expect from the pledge levels?
Yeah, so the pledge levels, this Kickstarter is really for just sort of getting Adventures in the Materiosphere out there. And you can get it as PDF, paperback, and hardback, just that book. Or you can also get the entire sort of collection of the original Faraway Land books. That would be, I think that's all 7 books. So both of those are available as PDF, a paperback, and hardback. And they're available to domestic and international backers through 2 different things, 2 different ways of distributing those. The domestic backers, well, if it's a digital reward, of course, you'll just get it digitally. But if you're a domestic backer and you get a physical reward, it'll be sent directly from Drive-Thru RPG to you. And then if you're an international backer for a physical reward, what you would get would be a at-cost coupon for ordering the books. Just because at this point, shipping, it's just, I'm just afraid there's so much going on, and I don't like to do stuff that's super out of my control when it comes to like sending things to the mail and like internationally. Having lived international, I know sort of what like books can look like, or like what things can look like sometimes depending on where you live. So what I try to do is just make it available to as many folks as possible, as easy as possible, and then to offer it for folks who already had the books, to give them a chance to just get this book, or for folks who are new to it and wanted to jump in and get everything, they have that opportunity as well.
Okay. And so what I appreciate about this is that there's no stretch goals. It's basically, it's like you get the books, and no add-ons. I don't think so, right? It's just more.
Right. There's no add-ons.
So if somebody's listening or watching this to say, is this an expansion or is this a standalone book? Can I just buy this, or do I need to buy the Tome of Awesome?
No, this is a standalone book. This is a core rule book. It's 380 plus pages. It's got all the rules for combat, character creation, building crews for your Materio ship combat, building your own Materio ships, magic, all the spells, like 130 different like monster entries. It's got everything that a core rule book has. It's basically like Tome of Awesome, but it's got it's got the whole sort of sci-fi element to it. So when Tome of Awesome is very focused, fantasy theme focused, even though it's got some sci-fi in it, this is much more sci-fi focused, but it has everything a core rulebook would have.
Okay, but this is playable with the Tome of Awesome. So you can. Was there any rules that you kind of had to change a bit? So is there? Can people play, like the sci-fi aspect of that and go ahead and like say that the Seas of Faraway Land and play the same characters?
Yeah, it's absolutely completely compatible. Everything's completely compatible. One of the, I don't want to use backbreaking in like a way that it's not really backbreaking, but one of the really difficult things was integrating things like when you have a ship on the sea and it has a movement rate, and then you have a ship in the air or a plane and it has a movement rate, and then you have a starship. How do you have that scalable? And also, how do you have that to where it's scalable to where it doesn't feel so cumbersome that somebody's going to have to like go and read like, a separate book to figure that out. That took a long time to get that to the point where I was sort of happy with it. And so, yeah, they're all compatible.
And so how did you beta test these then? Because you wrote this during the pandemic, right?
Yeah. It was really just done like what I did is I just go through and like I just go through and just play test the rules. And I basically like did that with Adventures in the Materiosphere. So there's not really any new mechanics. So the mechanics for Seas of Faraway Land, the way that ship combat works is the same way that Materio ship combat works in Adventures in the Materiosphere. So it really there really weren't any new rules that needed to be tested for Adventures in the Materiosphere. It was really just sort of the fluff on top of the mechanic for that book.
Okay. So talk to us about the now just from the logistics or the design aspect of formatting, creating the book. So you were explicit in the idea of wanting it to be at this size and not like one of your like larger books and stuff.
Yeah, I kind of wanted that digest size. These are 5.5 by 8.5. I don't know if that's digest size. I guess digest size is what, 6 by 9 or it's something. These books are 5.5 by 8.5. I like the small format. I don't know if I had like a thought in mind of like, hey, I'm gonna do this moving forward with all books. I do know that like I asked some people who had backed previous projects, would you be interested in a full-size book? And like people like who collect stuff are like, no, don't do that. It's like it's like me trying to play like with G.I. Joes and He-Man, like they don't correspond the size. Like I can't integrate those two things. So once I did the 5.5 by 8.5, so I just stuck with the format because I didn't want to ruin. I didn't want to make people angry about the book size. I didn't want to anger people about the book size.
And the other thing too is they're all color. Did you see a price difference if you look like have you ever looking from a Kickstarter perspective, like what's the price comparison? Did you ever think about, man, I want to try to save money, maybe I'll do it black and white or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean it's much cheaper. It would be much cheaper to sell the books in black and white, but
right.
I did some stuff with that where I went and with the very first book, the very first core rules before the first 4 books were sort of integrated into the Tome of Awesome.
Yeah.
And I did a bunch of pages just to see what it would look like in black and white. And like really part of the aesthetic of the game is just this really vibrant, sort of colorful candy sort of field. And I didn't feel like the black and white would work for it. It just doesn't have that feel to it. Although there may be a planet out there somewhere that's like a 1950s planet and the planet is all black and white, and maybe that's what the book should be. It's like 1950s black and white TV planet, and like that's what the book will look like. So
is it the Gray Plane?
It's not the Gray Plane. It's not mentioned in there. It's just something I just now thought about. No, the Gray Plains is like sort of this underworld. That's sort of where you go when you die.
Okay.
Yeah. It's got the Screamatorium. I will say that in Adventures in the Materiosphere, there's a planet that the planet is governed by an artificial intelligence, and all of the people who live on the planet are clones that have been living like this for hundreds of years. And the artificial intelligence became corrupted several hundred years ago by these things called soap operas. And so what it's done is it creates this soap. It's basically creating these clones, and they're all living in this giant global soap opera. So there's like all this backstabbing and like unneeded drama and stuff all over the world. That's another one of those ideas I was like really proud about.
I was going to ask you, is that one of those? That's
yeah, that is.
And so with that, I mean, I'm just looking at this here. Your pledge level, $35 for an almost 400-page color book. That's an amazing deal.
Yeah, I'm glad that you think so.
Yeah,
I think so too. I hope other people do, and you get the PDF with that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and so with that said, what are some of the tips that you would give people who are thinking about doing Kickstarters? What are the things different? Because this is like, I think what we said, your 8th Kickstarter, 7th, 8th Kickstarter.
Yeah.
What are the things that you've learned from your previous Kickstarters that you implemented here that you say, all right, this is my go-to. I'm always going to do this. This is the best way of doing this.
One of the things that I found that was the best is to let drive-through. Like I have the books printed through Drive-Through RPG because it's just the easiest. They do a pretty good job. I've always been happy with them, and it seems like folks have been happy with those. To let them do that. I know with the first Kickstarter, I ordered all of the books from Drive-Through. They were all shipped to my house, and then I bought boxes. And then I put all the books back in. I put all the books back in boxes, and then I reshipped all the books out. And I realized as I'm like as I'm like putting the second book in the box, like I've made a terrible mistake. So that's something that I learned. The other thing that I learned, and I never, and with all of the Faraway Land stuff, I always, the book is finished before I run the project. It's totally done. Like there's nothing left to do. I mean, I've got a couple small things like in the PDF where I'm putting in links and or like bookmarks and stuff, but like everything is like literally done. Like the book is completed and it's just, it's in its completed state. There's nothing, editing's done, artwork's done, everything's. So as soon as the Kickstarter finishes, after everything funds, and payments go through and all of that stuff, really everything will get sent out, and it really just streamlines the process because so many people. I mean, I'm sure, everybody's like been burned. If you've backed like a handful of Kickstarters, there's probably at some point that you didn't get that thing that was promised to you on time. And I don't know. I just, I want people to like, people put faith in me that I'm going to like deliver that thing. And so I try to like get it to them and do what I said I was going to do.
Right. And so what do you use to put it? So do you format and put together and like use like what, Adobe InDesign, or what do you use to put it together?
I use a program called Serif Plus X9, I think is what it's called. And I don't think it's supported anymore. I think now that it's become merged into the Affinity Studio. So like Affinity has like their equivalent of Photoshop, which is really good app. And then they have their equivalent of Illustrator, and they have Affinity Publisher. And I think, I might be wrong, but I think Serif Plus sort of became Affinity Publisher.
Okay.
Or whatever their publishing software is. So it's not supported anymore, but if it was up to me, I'd still be working on a Windows XP system that wasn't even hooked up to the internet, and I'd still be using like Photoshop, 7 and whatever.
And and so what are some tips that you would give people if they're looking at, just the actual design of the putting together of a book? Because you must have worked with the book that size and that thick. You must be worried about some bleed on there, right? And the images. Does that work?
Yeah. The way that I do it is I lay out each chapter as its own little book. Okay. And then what I do is I lay out all of the text. And because I'm doing it on my own, I don't have to know before I tell the artist what size the image is. What I can do is say, I want this much text on this page, and this is what I want the image to be. So when I go to do the artwork, I have this I was looking through it the other night, and I have this ridiculous list of all these pieces of paper taped together. Has all of these things. It says page 245. This is the image. This is the size. This is how many pixels it is in length and width, and this is what I want to do in the image. And then I have like a really quick thumbnail of that. So when I go back to do it, I have a good idea. So. And then once all the chapters are laid out, that's when they all get compiled and then put into the sort of final form.
Another thing too, like I love about the book is like all your books is you can tell that the drawings you put in almost to the point where it's like as you're creating the rules and creating some like scenes, you're like. Yeah, I need to draw this. This is going to be fun to draw. Like it's
yeah, for sure. I think especially that picture you were just showing. That's like I'm pretty sure that's like gods of faraway land. So it's like these gods that are standing around like this world and like rolling dice. I believe.
Yeah, it is. It's like they're rolling dice. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a like that was one that was hand drawn and then it was scanned and then it was put in Inkscape and then it was like gone over in Vector in Vector, and then it was like dropped into Photoshop. It took like that drawing took a ridiculous amount of time, and it looked so simple. But for me at the time, it took a long time to do that. And
then of course you have these homages to the 8-bit video games on here too.
Yeah.
You just have and here's your Cosmos. This is what I was trying to look for earlier. The Cosmos of Faraway Land. There's like a genuine feeling of like you can tell you enjoy creating this, and you must. So your maps, you're making maps on here and everything, and and I gotta, so for the, for the audio folks, go to faruniverse.com, check it out. You can look at the character sheets. The character sheets are also great, and as you say, it's and like you're saying, it's reminiscent kind of D&D in a way, but not. It's inspirational of it, but as you said, more of a simple design, especially where how you have the stats of the monsters and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
And so talk to us about looking back at the Kickstarter. As we said earlier, it's Adventures in the Materiosphere is a standalone. You can have that specifically, and you can as well if you want to. Is like you can get the paperback bundle, you can get the entire series, and as I say, for an amazing price. So if you put all the pages together on here, what are you talking over, like 1,000 pages?
Yeah, I think it's around 1,200 or so pages.
1,200 pages, and then looking at it from that perspective is, if you're looking at it from like the entire, so $110 if they wanted 1,200 pages of paperback.
Yeah.
Color paperback, $110.
Yeah.
Plus the PDF.
Right. Yeah.
Jeez Louise, man. Dirk, so you're just that's amazing. That is, that's probably the best deal on Kickstarter right now. It's got to be.
Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, like the goal is like, to get the book out. Like, I mean,
right.
and to not like try and, I know I'm not going to get rich from that. I didn't start designing Faraway Land because I was like, man, I'm getting ready to retire. It was really just, it's like, I mean, for me, like, I know people say this about stuff and I believe them when they say it. But for me, it's like an obsession. Like if I don't get it out, like I feel, if I'm not drawing, if I'm not writing, if I'm not creating something, I start to feel like I'm sort of suffocating and I'm stagnant in that thing, and that I can't move, and I get depressed, and it's just sort of bad overall. And it's an actual like depression and all of that stuff that happens. So,
right.
And also I look forward to it. It's that thing that in the morning I'm like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to draw this anthropomorphic mouse that's like holding a laser pistol, and I'm gonna draw this dude with a paper bag on his head that's dressed like some sort of like weird Spartan warrior. And I look forward to doing that because it sort of gives me that thing of like, I get up and I have that hope of being able to do that. I love doing that.
So you make these characters like, now I got to figure out how this fits in the game. Like you just like invent races and like.
Yeah, for sure. So see, the guy there with the bag on his head.
Uh-huh.
There's a Pink Floyd album called Animals, and in one of the songs, there's a line that says, "Wave upon wave of demented Avengers march cheerfully out of obscurity into a dream," and so those characters are called Demented Avengers, and it comes from that song. And I was like, when I was listening to that song, I was like, man, Demented Avengers, what would these look like? Oh, of course, they would look like Spartan warriors that have like a grocery bag with 2 eye holes cut out on their head. That's what Roger Waters and the band were talking about when they wrote Animals.
So next steps for you, Dirk. What is your as you mentioned, you kind of have this ode to Mad Max expansion process on there. Is there any ideas of doing maybe some more expansion books specifically on different spheres, different worlds as well?
Yeah, I've got some of those things in the works. The main project moving forward out of this is I'm doing a graphic novel with a friend of mine that's based on Faraway Land, where it's just and I think that's sort of the direction that I'm going to go for at least a little while, is to start doing some stories. I wrote a novel last year for Faraway Land. It's a middle grade novel about an orca and a little girl and a simian, and they go on these adventures, very episodic, where they battle Bulgo cats and go to the Bulgosphere, and they go to this other continent, and they have all these adventures and like go to these undead dwarves, and there's all this stuff. So that's one thing that's completed. But I think I want to start doing I want to complete this graphic novel that I'm working on, which is about a finder who is basically like a private investigator who's trying to discover who did what, like who murdered someone in a city called, the city's called Oricon, and it's on the map, and one of the maps. But yeah, it's just going to be like a graphic novel about faraway land.
Yeah, was that we were talking about that novel? Was that the thing that's on your YouTube page? That the narration you're doing on the YouTube page that you have?
So yeah, so that was like from several years ago, where I was doing sort of like this YouTube like thing with drawing and sort of illustrating it, and then like doing this voiceover. It was just super time consuming to do that. I mean, each one of those things would take me like just hours and hours to do that, like to do the recording and to do the script and to do all of the artwork and then to put the whole thing together. It's just a ton of effort. And so what I did was I decided I'm going to take those stories, I'm going to compile them into a novel. And that's one of the things that I did during the pandemic, was write that novel.
Okay. All right. Cool.
While I was writing Adventures in the Materiosphere.
So how do you fit the time in? That's the other question.
I mean, that's what I'm doing. I mean, really, that's just what I'm doing. Like, I don't really watch a lot of TV. I don't really last year was really nice, like for people who are introverted, because we didn't have to hang out. Like, I was like, I'm cool. I can live in this basement all year. Like, I don't need to be around people. It's all right. So I just had a lot of time.
Right. So if people want to kind of follow your stuff and learn more about it, what would be the best place to do that?
Probably not Far Universe, because I like never update it. I'm terrible on social media and everything. Follow on Facebook, Faraway Land on Facebook, or you can go to Far Universe. Every now and then I do update there. Okay. Or they can, probably Facebook is the best place. Like, I know that's like, grandpa's social media at this point for a lot of people, but that's where I do most of the stuff. I'm not into social media too much. I just don't really interact with it well. Right. I don't know how to use it. It's like we were talking about before, when I go to the gas pumps, I'm like, how's this gas pump work? That's like social media. Social media is like a gas pump to me. It's like an unfamiliar gas pump at this point.
Okay, so the best place is probably go to check it out. Go to the Facebook page.
Yeah.
Faraway Land RPG. Okay.
Yeah, and if they go to faruniverse.com, then on that page there's a bunch of downloads. So if you go to the download section there, you can actually download the quick start rules, which are totally free, and it has all the rules that you need to like get started. It also has like character sheets, and then it has like 15 or 16 adventures, and they're all totally free.
Wow. Also
on that page or on the website is a wiki, and if you go to the wiki, the Faraway Land wiki, it's got like a bunch of the if you go to races and monsters on the wiki, it's got a bunch of those listed, and they're statted out, and it has their illustrations with them, or their pictures and their stat blocks and everything. So and there's a giant space slug.
Well, this is great, Dirk. And please, folks, it's as of this recording, you got 27 days left to help back the Faraway Land RPG Adventures in the Materiosphere. And as I said, this is the best deal you're going to find on Kickstarter right now. The price of, if you just want the Materiosphere, or if you want the entire bundle, over 1,200 pages, 1,200 full color pages on there, that's $110 right there. Or if you just want that, and if you're a fan of science fiction, if you're a fan of any of that stuff, you can get the book itself for $35 for paperback. Or so yeah, definitely check it out. Or as you said, there you have a hardback for $45. Wow, what man, that's amazing. That's an amazing deal, Dirk. So cool. Well, thank you very much, Dirk. It's been a genuine pleasure to talk to you. Come back on for your next Kickstarter.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I had fun talking to you. It's been nice. Thank you for having me, inviting me, and everything.
You're welcome.
Stefan Pogue up on the wall. You can't see it though. It's like these weird like heads with wings and like somebody looking horrified. And then there's some stuff from Faraway Land, and then like the frame that's like right here. It's from Adventure Time. I was at a fair once, and I didn't even know what Adventure Time was when I saw it, and I was like, I love that. Like, it looks
really?
so cool. And I had it hanging on my wall for like several months before I ever even knew what it was. And I was like, hey, I've got that. And then I started watching it.
So did you you never saw Adventure Time before you started Faraway Land?
I saw it like right around the same time. Like Faraway Land's something that I had sort of going. I did like a web comic years ago that had a bunch of stuff from Faraway Land, but in about 2014, I started putting it sort of all together into the game.
Okay.
But I had a web comic when I was living in Eastern Europe for a while, and I was doing that, and I had several issues of it, but I stopped it, and then later on I took that and revised it and sort of like did the whole Faraway Land thing with it.
Oh, okay, cool.